Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes as everyone is able to join. But thank you for being here, especially I know on the East Coast, the workday is officially done. So we're excited to have you all. All right. And as everyone's coming in, we're just going to give it another 30 seconds or so. But I have a couple of polls and I'd love to see who is joining us. So as you come in or as you're waiting, please go ahead and just let us know what your role is here and maybe why you've decided to join. Get that information in a second. All right, and the poll got a good mix. Some admissions officers, higher education professionals, high school counselors, even a couple college students in here. Thanks everyone for joining. I have one more poll. Where are you joining from? I know that our presenters today have a good range of where we're all from, so we'd love to hear from you all. All right, we'll give it another couple seconds. A lot from the Midwest, my home. Love to see it, but it gets mattering elsewhere. We got to get some more people from the Southwest on here. But cool, thank you all for doing that. We're going to go ahead and get started. I want to say officially welcome to this month's Learning Lab, the Building Rural Student Organizations on Your Campus Learning Lab. My name is Corinne Smith. I am one of the Learning Lab co-leaders. You won't hear from me for very long today. I'm just going to kind of introduce this session. What we are going to do, though, is we're going to spend a little time on introductions of our wonderful panelists from Princeton, the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, and Yale. And then we're going to really spend most of the session today going through Q&A about the student organizations and how they created them and how different professionals can support those organizations. Oh, it doesn't want to go. There we go. And just a couple housekeeping reminders here. In terms of navigating Zoom, we are going to use the Q&A function for today. Some of our panelists might pop something into the chat as we go, but most of the questions that we'll ask you to submit, we want to do those through the Q&A. We'll be monitoring those and we'll answer everything that we can. As an attendee, you don't have to worry about camera. You're going to be muted. And this session is recorded. We know that a lot of our members of the Rural and Small Town SIG do watch this afterwards. So we're excited that you all that might be joining us later are able to view and hear from our guests. Now, just a reminder, again, use that Q&A function. You can use it at any point throughout this presentation. As our guests are speaking, that'd be a great time to start submitting questions. And then lastly, thank you for joining us. If you are not a member of the NACAC Rural and Small Town Special Interest Group, please know that it is free. We have people from all across the country and the world joining us who are really just interested in learning a little bit more, getting best practices and hearing about some of these different learning labs every single month. We also have a lot of guides and forums and different things that we produce to keep people engaged and really just knowledgeable about the space. So you can find out more by following that link or using kind of your phone and hovering over the little dinosaur there. It's awesome. But I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to stop the screen share and I'm going to turn everything over to our host today, Clayton, to get us started and introduce our panelists. So if you could all come on screen, see y'all later. Have a great time.
Awesome. Great. Thank you so much, Corinne. Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Clayton. I'm a graduate of Yale University. As of this May, I studied global affairs and history, and I'm originally from a small town in Kentucky. And so kind of to start off, I'll be reading the introductions of each of our three lovely panelists that we have today. So first up, we have Madison Mellinger, who is a senior at Princeton University from Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. She studies in the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, and the bulk of her independent research focuses on policy that affects rural communities. Madison started Princeton's first rural student affinity group in fall 2021 and is currently organizing a conference for rural students at colleges and universities across the country that is set to take place in February 2023. 2023. In the future, Madison hopes to continue creating spaces for rural students to thrive by serving as an admissions officer, college advisor, or professor. In her free time, Madison enjoys gardening at Princeton Seed Farm, volunteering at the Princeton Nursery School, and dancing with Rocks, Princeton's belly dance troupe. Next is Lil Selner, who is a junior at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign, majoring in neuroscience and sociology. She's originally from Chester, Illinois, a small town in southern Illinois situated on the Mississippi River. Liz is president and founder of the Rural Area Student Initiative, or RASI, a registered student organization at UIUC. RASI strives to provide resources and support to rural high school and college students in a number of ways and believes every student, rural or otherwise, deserves the right to an informed decision concerning higher education. And our third panelist is Leanna Byler, who is a junior at Yale University. She grew up on a small dairy and horse farm near Canoa Lake in northwestern Pennsylvania. At Yale, she's majoring in environmental studies with a concentration in food and agriculture because she's passionate about rural climate resilience. This academic year, she's the president of the Rural Students Alliance at Yale, where she hopes to build a stronger rural student community and advocate for greater higher education access for rural high schoolers. Her favorite rural thing to do is drive around with her windows down, listening to Kenny Chesney and Eric Church. So thank you all so much for joining today. I'm super excited to hear from the three panelists today. So we'll go ahead and start with Madison.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming and making time for this during such a busy time of the year. Rural student success is an issue that's just so important to me as a rural student, but also someone that gets to hang out with people like Clayton and Corinne all the time. This issue is very often at the front of my mind. So I guess I can start by telling you all a little bit about how Princeton's Rural Student Affinity Group was created. So our Rural Student Affinity Group started last fall, and it's housed in the Emma Bloomberg Center for Access and Opportunity on campus. I started the group as an affinity group of first generation and low income rural students, mostly because the Center for Access and Opportunity gears most of their programming towards FLY students, but also does programming for veteran students. And I thought that rural students could also benefit from some of their programs. And the goals of our group are, first and foremost, just to make the rural community at Princeton visible. Before coming to Princeton, I don't believe I knew of a rural group that existed here. And as far as my research goes, there has never been a rural group here before the one that I was able to create. And also before coming to Princeton, I don't think I myself knew that I was a rural student until I was put into an environment very different from my hometown. So our first goal is just to make rural students visible on Princeton's campus. Our second goal is to connect rural students across all class years. Our group is definitely in its infancy, but it's my goal that in the future, there is somewhat of like a mentorship pairing between upper class rural students and incoming younger rural students. And then thirdly, our goal is to bond over discussions of home and intersectional identities, and our plans for the future as well in terms of, what we want to do, how we navigate home and careers, and, how we think about the futures of our rural communities as well. Some of the events that we do, as of now, mostly center around monthly dinners in town in Princeton. Through the Emma Bloomberg Center, was able to secure a good bit of funding for the rural student group. And so a lot of our meetings focus on going out to eat together and talking over dinner. Although I really hope to build on this programming and encourage our rural student group in the future to participate in conferences for rural student success and to host speakers. It's also my dream that at some point we can create a better network to connect with rural alums and also to connect with high school students, which I think we all do somewhat informally at this point, but I would love to see that more institutionalized at Princeton. As I mentioned before, funding was not a massive hurdle for the rural student group at Princeton. We are very lucky to have a lot of funding for our student groups. However, a bigger hurdle for us was finding staff and faculty including, professors, but also deans and administrators that understood the rural student experience and could serve as mentors for the group. Right now, we are a largely unmentored group, which I think at times has its perks in that students can really drive a lot of the conversations that we have. However, it's increasingly becoming a problem that we aren't super connected to any admin or faculty at the institution or any Princeton alums that can provide guidance. I'm hoping in the future we can create something that is more akin to a rural student alliance so that we can do more advocacy work, extend beyond the FLY community, and also have deeper connections with faculty and alumni. And before I close, I just wanted to touch on both my plan moving forward for the Princeton Rural Student Group, as well as for the conference I'm planning, which I know Clayton mentioned in my bio. So my goals for the Princeton Student Group definitely align with what I've touched on before in terms of expanding our alumni network and expanding the ways that we connect with our home communities. And just passing that torch on to another student to continue leading the rural student group and hopefully expanding it in many ways. But in terms of the conference that I'm hosting, I'm really hoping to build a broader network of rural students and connect, both with the panelists today, as well as other rural students who are doing the same work at other institutions to create a database of sorts or community of practice for rural college students to continue connecting over the years and learning from each other, networking with each other, and so on. I think it's important to remember that many of us are sort of forging this path as we're walking it, and we really appreciate any support as we create these groups at our institutions and attempt to form like cross-institutional coalitions, but also at the same time navigate our own struggles and successes as rural students. So thank you all so much for coming and listening.
Awesome. Thank you, Madison. I'm about to I have some things that are pretty similar to that, as far as some of the things that our organization is working on, as in the overarching ideas. But first off, I'll start off with why. So my organization, I founded it and I'm president of it. We started it early in this year, 2022. And it's called the Rural Area Student Initiative, goes by Rossi. But the main reason for founding it was because I experienced such a culture shock when I came to U of I that I was not expecting. Where I live, U of I is essentially an Ivy League. I've never known anyone who's gone to an Ivy League. I think no one from my high school went here, and I live in the state. And the main thing is that I just felt really jaded. I was really jealous of the students who did have resources, and I know this isn't a positive thing, and I don't want to try and paint it as one, because Rossi was born out of frustration, mainly just feeling like I was struggling so much, and I didn't know why. I didn't know why no one was talking about it. I honestly felt a little crazy at times. The imposter syndrome definitely was a really big issue for me and something I still struggle with, which I think a lot of underrepresented students can attest to. But that was probably the trigger for starting Rossi. So we have two goals. Our biggest one is to provide support to rural college students at U of I as they navigate their transition to higher education. So I love U of I, but I felt really out of place when I first got here. And I used to tell people, oh, I'm from Southern Illinois. And everyone's first reaction was always, the state goes down that far? They had no clue, even people from Chicago. It was crazy. The point in that being, though, is that I want to keep other rural students from having to feel the way that those of us who came before, I guess, had to feel. So I want them to know that their feelings are valid. They are underrepresented, because that's a whole other thing, is sometimes I worry that, I'm not underrepresented enough. And basically just to create a home away from home for them. So that's what we do at the college level. We do that by hosting socials. So actually, in a week, we are doing a Christmas cookie decorating social where everyone gets to decorate Christmas cookies and take them home, and or any holidays, and wear like ugly Christmas sweaters. So I'm really excited for that. But that's besides the point. Rossi's second goal is kind of what Madison touched on, in that they want to kind of expand beyond their university, or, kind of just being on campus. So we have founded, it's still in development, so I apologize if this gets a little rambly here, but it's called the Liaison Project. What we do is rural students in Rossi have the option to become a liaison to their rural high school, which I'll explain what that means in just a tad. So they function as a pre-established connection to their high school. But on top of having that connection and that pre-established trust, they also have a really unique knowledge of their school's culture, the way things work, the student body, and what resources they already have available to them. So as past students of their high school, they know better than anyone how to best serve the students of that high school. And so what they do is they reach out. We're right about to reach out to administrators. So, but again, I'm getting ahead of myself. So basically, they utilize this connection by reaching out to their high school administrators, so specifically their principal and their guidance counselor. And they basically funnel college access materials through those administrators to the student body, is the goal. So like I said, right now we're in the data collection phase. We have our liaisons. They've reached out. But that starts in this week. So, we're right at the crux of it. So it's all very exciting. And that's why I'm kind of everywhere when I talk about it right now, because it's kind of been on the forefront of my mind. The biggest challenge with that has been the college access materials that we will provide. We obviously want them all to be free, and we want them to be carefully curated for that high school, or at least tailored to that high school. And then they'll also work with the administration to determine the best ways to distribute these materials. But I think I always love to ramble about that because it's very exciting, but it's also very confusing. The biggest hurdles we faced actually goes right into that is, again, she touched on some amazing things, but it's ironic that we are rural students trying to help other rural students when I guess no one's really helping us, I'm really lucky. I have an amazing exec board who are phenomenal and they really help out, but it is kind of funny trying to get rural students resources that you also do not have access to. And so because of that, it's been really confusing trying to navigate that, kind of doing it all on your own. And we also don't have any kind of advisor on campus or any connection to our faculty. That's something that we're working on right now. But I think honestly, one of the biggest challenges is just where to start. There's so many things we could be doing, and there's so many things I want to be doing. And there's only so much you can do. So I think that finishes mine.
Okay, thank you, Liz. Thank you, Madison. Hi, everyone. I'm so happy to be here with you. And I'm going to start out talking about how the Rural Students Alliance at Yale, or RSA, was founded. RSA was founded in 2018 by a class of 2019 alum, Jared Mashon. He reached out to a group of rural students that he already knew of and started to organize informal dinners for them. The following year, Clayton was president, and I want to credit him with structuring the organization and laying the groundwork for the first executive board, writing the first strategic plan, and starting to plan events in addition to dinners. Before COVID, RSA hosted small hikes, pumpkin carvings, and game nights. But during the pandemic, RSA did its best to host virtual game nights, dinners, and conversations about rurality. As a social and cultural group, COVID really hurt our membership, and we've been spending the last 2 years building a community among the current student body. Since its establishment, RSA's main goal has been to connect rural Yaleys with each other through on-campus events and our group chat. We have a group me with over 150 members, so we share rural articles and content we come across, and we also have 2 collaborative country music Spotify playlists. We've also always had a strong relationship with our admissions office. Each fall, a handful of RSA members speak at a rural and small town students virtual admissions event. For high schoolers, we answer questions about applying to Yale and our experiences as rural students. And then this past spring, we continued that conversation as members spoke to admitted students to answer any questions they had about deciding where to attend, even if it wasn't Yale, academics at Yale, social life, and the general transition as a rural student. And those conversations continued in person at our admitted students day social mixer. And then this year we've been hosting various food-centric events. That's a really big thing on Yale's campus. You can get anyone anywhere if you have food. So we've had ice cream socials, dinners, and then we just hosted a course registration session where we brought donuts and hot cider. We've also been working with admissions to help rural and small town applicants consider Yale as an option and answer any other questions. I have just appointed members to my executive board, and we're looking forward to planning our next semester and laying the organizational groundwork for future e-boards. As I've alluded to, our biggest hurdle is growing our community post-pandemic, so it has also been our biggest focus. Last year, we were trying to connect with members of the classes of 2024 as well as 2025 while navigating ever-changing COVID policies and public health concerns. We're continuing those efforts this year while also reaching out to the first years so we can build across-class relationships here on Yale's campus. And finally, I just want to say for me personally, RSA became a community I really valued during my sophomore year when I was coming to terms with my rurality and how that's an identity most Yaleys can't claim or even connect to. So I always find it remarkable how easy it is for rural Yaleys to start talking and realize the similar experiences that they've had in high school about extracurriculars or academic offerings like AP classes, or even at Yale, where many of us took our first Ubers or DoorDashed our first food deliveries. So this year, I'm just really grateful to be president and work on the initiatives I care about to benefit future rural Yaleys.
Great, awesome. Yeah, thanks everyone. So now we will go ahead and start our little Q&A session. So if all the panelists could come back just so we can kind of see everyone, and we'll go through some questions. So as questions are coming in from some of the guests, I think I'll go ahead and start with kind of just the biggest one of just talking about your experience of kind of what was your biggest adjustment coming from a small town and then going to colleges, of just like, it could be kind of anything, any sort of culture shock. So like for me, I feel like one of the biggest ones was just kind of like the difference in like opportunities that people had in high schools. So like I would like meet people and they were like, oh, like my high school like offered like multivariable calculus. So I'm going to go ahead and like jump into like discrete my first year. And I was like, wow. I was like, I think my high school was barely supporting like an AP calculus AP program. So I was like, that's incredibly impressive. So, I mean, I would just love to hear kind of what you all had on those takes too. So.
I'm happy to go first. I think there were quite a few things for me that others have already mentioned in terms of like courses that people had and like calling your first Uber. I had no idea how to use public transportation when I got here, and Princeton's right next to New York City. So everybody's like taking the train to New York to hang out. And I think I did it wrong the first time, ended up like having to pay a bunch of extra money. I've learned now, but yeah, I was totally not prepared for that. But then there are also like things I think that sort of led me to realize I was a rural student that were more like interpersonal interactions, like with people at Princeton. I got a lot of comments like, oh, aren't you excited that you don't have to be with those people anymore? Meaning like people in my home community and my family. And so I'm really hoping that groups like this can begin, at some point fostering dialogue about some of the microaggressions against people from rural places as well.
I definitely have a couple things, and I completely agree. I think my biggest culture shock is actually last week I had someone tell me this for the first time, and it's really stuck with me since then, is they kind of acknowledged the fact, first off, that I was a rural student, which is always rare, very rare. So that's very nice when people do. But for the first time, someone acknowledged that I'm a rural student who pursued STEM, like neuroscience, which is really hard. Don't do it. It's so hard. But part of that is people in my classes did cancer research in high school because their high school had a program where they were allowed to. Another thing I realized is, and there's just so many small things, but the way that people speak is not just as far as accents go, but kind of like inflection, things like that. I used to have people kind of make fun of the way that I would sometimes smush words together, because that's just like what I'm used to. And sometimes it was in good fun, and sometimes it was borderline like, really? And of course, I have to touch on the fact that I have spent so much money on Uber Eats. I don't want to talk about it. I went crazy. When you only have a McDonald's and a Hardee's to your name where you live, you're just gonna go insane. Yep.
Yeah, I will echo everything that everyone else has already said. And I will follow up on the New York thing, since we're on the other side. A lot of people go down, and I just went for my first time this past fall, or well, September, and I was like, what am I doing? What is the Metro North? I had to download Apple Wallet, all that kind of stuff. But I would say here on Yale's campus, I was very surprised to find that in conversations, people were sort of shocked about the things I had to say about how I grew up. I mean, I grew up on a farm. Very few restaurants. I drove 20 minutes to high school, but that was like almost 20 miles. And that's just something that a lot of students couldn't connect with.
I just want to jump in really quick to say that that's so true. When I would tell people things, sometimes they just outright wouldn't believe me. They'd be like, no way, like you're lying. And I was like, what? I don't know what I gained, but yes.
Yeah, no, I totally feel that. I feel like when I would tell people that like my high school didn't have like a working chemistry program, like we just didn't have one. Like people would be like, there's literally no way. And I was like, I promise, like we didn't have one. So definitely feel that. Yeah, thank you all so much for sharing responses to that question. Another question I had too was kind of about just the idea that a lot of students don't really realize that they're rural until they get to college campuses. Like that was like my case, where I kind of just assumed, like I knew people lived in New York, but I don't know, I just only had met people that were kind of like from like small towns like mine. So how do you kind of hope that your organization will hopes to like find and help these students that are kind of discovering this new identity that they like didn't really think about before coming to your university?
I can jump in here first. So early this fall, we actually received an admissions like email list that included everyone that our admissions office counts as rural. So at the beginning of the year, ahead of our first event, we sent an email out to everyone welcoming them, telling them what we were doing at this like extracurricular bazaar where all of our groups sort of set up tables and you walk through. And when people stopped by, they all said, or many of them said, I didn't even know this group existed. I didn't even consider myself rural until I got this email. So I think those are the ways that we're doing our best to introduce people to the group and their rural identity in whatever way they want to claim it, and just sort of cultivating that and helping them see the similarities they may have to other students.
Oh, go ahead, Liz.
Sorry. My introduction to being a rural student, I guess my real introduction was when I first stepped foot onto campus, but I kind of had a pre-introduction where I basically got a very large merit scholarship from U of I that I wasn't expecting. And my parents thought that it was sent to the wrong person. Like, you know, I'm very lucky I had great stats, and that's part of the reason why I got it. But it was also, there was just no way. There was no way. And when we went online to try and figure out what the name of this was, why I got it, it said it was for underserved students. And one of the requirements was if you are from a county that sends 2 or less students to U of I every 5 years, which meant that I go to my state school and I am the only person from my county here, because I knew who the second person was and they're not here anymore. So that was definitely interesting. I like that, you know, you guys kind of have that experience of like, I can't even imagine what the environment's like at an Ivy League with people who, you know, I'm not sure, I really don't know much about the culture of it, but I can expect that it would definitely be really challenging for you guys. So I applaud you for that. But I think one of the crazy things is that I've experienced all that too here. I mean, it's just crazy. And so something we did is, I know this is a little long-winded, but we actually work with the Office of Minority Student Affairs here. So every student from a low sending county, so a county in Illinois that doesn't send a lot of students to U of I, gets tagged. They actually don't have a metric to measure rurality. We're working on that. We're trying to kind of push them, convince them. But I was a minority student when I got here. Like, you know, part of the Office of Minority Student Affairs, all that, and just was never told why. So that was kind of a jumble, but definitely that's the way that we're working on it.
Yeah, I think I would add to what Liz said about some of the feelings of being a rural student, starting when you get onto campus, but kind of like beginning to boil whenever you're first about to go off to college. For example, when I was applying to Princeton, everyone does like an alumni interview. You can elect in to do one, and most people, their alumni interviews are in person. You get to go have coffee with an alum, and presumably there's someone somewhat similar to you that understands at least where you're coming from. But for me, there weren't any alums to interview in my area. And so someone from Florida called me on the phone and we talked for a little bit, but it was very like, it was not like we really had a connection about anything. And I think that was really frustrating because I think I would have had a much better time if I could have asked a rural alum about their transition. Yeah.
And I know I promised to stay away, but Clayton and I were chatting on the side, just to speak for a moment from kind of the educator and admissions perspective about what we do. We knew right away at Yale and with RSA that it was really important to be able to connect students. And also we knew that a lot of students don't realize that they identify as coming from rural and small towns in this process. So for the first couple of years, while Clayton was president, you'll remember this, I actually spent a good portion of my summer, like 6 weeks, going through every matriculating student application to Yale to figure out what students were most likely to identify as coming from a rural and small town. At this point, I just don't have the capacity to do that for 1,500 students. And our indicators and kind of the data that we pull both from the College Board as well as from the rural SIG lists that anyone that's part of the SIG can access has allowed us to kind of pull based on some of those tags for RSA and give them a list. These are not perfect. There are absolutely students in there who might attend a boarding school in a rural area, or who might travel 45 minutes to a school in an urban area, so it's not identified as rural. And unfortunately, the tags are based on kind of school, not neighborhood, something I'm working on for part of my dissertation. So there's a lot of logistical complications, but we're doing our best on our side as educators to provide a list that we hope is somewhat accurate. We give that over to Leanna in the summer before school starts. We try to do it a week or two before students arrive so that they know about the extracurricular bazaar. We can tell them when the first meeting of the group is. But honestly, a lot of students, again, don't realize that they identify that way right away. Typically, we'll see the numbers of RSA and people coming to the events increase in the second semester of the year. Students realize that that might be their experience, and we try to do another kind of outreach push at that point to get more students engaging in the organization. What my dream would be as an educator, and for anyone that works at a college that's on here, this is like what I would love to see, is that we have peer liaisons on our campus that are rural and small town peer liaisons. We have peer liaisons for students from first generation, low income, underrepresented minority backgrounds, and our students know who those people are. They know where to go to get support and to talk to someone who comes from a similar background. And I think that if we have even 10 or 15 rural peer liaisons on our campus, our students can go ask them, and they know to provide the resources and funnel those students right into RSA based on kind of that background and students they might be well connected with. So that's the dream. I raise it every single year. I try to do it as part of kind of attached to our first gen low income initiatives. I'm really working on getting it to happen, but there's a lot of hurdles and roadblocks that come with that just from an administrative perspective. And that's why Clayton and Leanna have really worked to kind of create this big Civ, little Civ program that replicates that. But the problem with that is that that's just for students who's already opted into the organizations. It's not a large program, right? So thank you. Y'all are doing great. Good job.
Yeah, thank you for jumping in, Corinne. That is a good point though, about like there may be some kind of shortcomings in like in terms of the admission side, but I think that's kind of where rural student organizations can come in and be really useful. I know that there was someone that I knew at Yale, and he went to a high school in Chattanooga, so I don't think he was registered as a rural student, but he was from rural northeastern Alabama, and so I think just kind of his proximity to me, I like told him about the organization, he became involved too. So I think there are kind of ways that like having these organizations are definitely helpful to kind of maybe like catch some of the shortcomings. But no, thank you for that, Corinne, and thank you all to the panelists too. And then the last intro question that I'm going to give, and then I'll jump into kind of other questions that people are having, and then just see where we go from there, is just about your rural students organization that you all have created or joined. And now lead. So what kind of inspired you to create your organization, or like what kind of inspired you to join? Because I know there are tons of rural students that do come to universities, but I mean, you three, you all are a part of organizations, started one, and are now leading it. And so I guess just kind of what was that journey for you, kind of going from adjustment to where you are now?
I'll take this one first, just because I have some feelings about this. So I definitely did not. I think I don't really know how else to phrase this other than sometimes it feels like it kind of just fell into my lap, in the fact that another really big defining moment of college was when I met my first other rural student. And that's when we were finally able to talk to each other and validate each other. And he is my treasurer who helped me found Rossi amazingly. And that was definitely one of the catalysts, because finally I could express out loud without someone being like, "Are you sure? Really?" I can't believe that. Like, you don't say, and have someone be like, oh, finally, yes, me too. So that was phenomenal. And because of that, you know, we just spent so much time kind of chatting and venting and complaining, in all honesty. And then one day we just kind of sat there and we were like, what if we like did something to maybe try and change it? And then that was like 6 months of planning and trying to figure out what we were going to do, how we were going to do it, because there is no precedent and there's no formula for this. And I think that's one of the hardest parts. I'm sure we can all agree is like just getting the word out there and also being one of the people that you're trying to help is tough. And I guess that's mainly what prompted me to start this. Yeah. And I never went out with a lead on that I want to found something or run something. It just, there was no one else to do it. And so why not me? Yeah, that's pretty much where I went with that.
I think in my experience, I started having thoughts about forming some sort of rural student group towards the end of my freshman year. But my freshman year was also virtual. So I think I started to notice a lot more of the differences between the ways my peers and I grew up and experienced high school whenever we were all Zooming in from our homes. I noticed that my peers weren't losing internet connection as often as I was. And, you know, there were just a lot of other things. I took a photography class and noticed how we all like photographed things differently and like what was in our space for us to photograph. And then I also took a history class, like a modern history class, where we read Hillbilly Elegy, which I'll get on my soapbox about another time, but it made me realize that people's views of rural America at Princeton are very skewed and very stereotypical. I guess Hillbilly Elegy is the only thing I've ever read about rural America in my classes here at Princeton, and my professor didn't even touch on the potentially problematic aspects of it. There's never been a class taught about rural America, and so as I just, you know, started to realize these things about Princeton, I was like, there are so many big things that I want to change, but I need other students with me to be able to do that. And I also need other students with me just to, like Liz said, have somebody to talk to and hang out with that understands this perspective. So that was sort of my motivation for starting the group at Princeton.
So I joined RSA, at least our group chat, my first year, which was virtual primarily. And I knew there were events going on. I'll be honest, I was a little Zoom fatigued. I wasn't that active. But when I got back to campus in the fall of 2021, I saw the message to apply for our executive board. And I just knew right away I wanted to do it because I had started to reflect on my first year at Yale, and I realized how out of place I sometimes felt with my rural background and with people I didn't know that well, and even people that I did know very well. And so I just wanted to join the board and meet other rural students. I felt like I had met many, and just sort of see what this space is like and what I can do to help make it better and make it more prominent on campus. And so this year, becoming president sort of fell into my lap as well. We were looking for a change of leadership, and I just sort of said, yeah, I'll do it. I'll step up because there are just so many more issues about rurality that I've come to realize is so important to me, including climate resilience, jobs, higher education, even high school education, all those sorts of things. And I just want to be able to connect with other people on this campus and beyond this campus that are passionate about the same things.
Great, awesome. Yeah, thank you all so much for those answers. Yeah, no, it means so much, I'm sure, to other rural students who are like now a part of the organization that someone has taken the time. So it's definitely greatly appreciated. We'll go ahead and jump into some of these questions that have been coming in. The first one that I'll go ahead and propose to the panelists is the one from Brandon. What challenges did you face in forming your organizations on campus? What advice would you give to a rural student looking to start an organization on their campus?
I can go first because my answer is kind of brief. I talked about it a little bit in my first like intro to the Princeton group, but I think it really depends on your campus. On many campuses, like money is a big obstacle. At Princeton, it was a little bit different in that money wasn't a massive obstacle, but finding support and people who understood rurality and where students were coming from was a really big obstacle. So I think it's very institution specific, what kind of, hurdles you might run into.
I would definitely, I do agree, but you would be surprised how many are not institution specific that you think would be, because I can assure you guys, like I said, I don't know like the exact differences or whatever, but U of I is definitely the school where kids from the suburbs, the Chicago suburbs, come and roll their eyes and be like, "Ugh, I'm like at the state school." And they're like a CS major, and it's one of like the best CS programs around. And I'm from Southern Illinois, and I basically had an army to like help me get here, cheering me on. Not my school administration, but we can talk about that later. But yeah, it was like I was the success story, and U of I was my success story. And to have people have that not be their success story was very interesting. And I definitely experienced a lot of just elitism, honestly. So much I had no clue that it existed. Like, anywho, but yeah.
I would say I can't speak on forming an organization, but at Yale, I've been fortunate enough to get a lot of funding support from our student government body. They run extracurricular funding, and we've been able to apply for that. And we're not a large enough organization yet to need a lot of funding, but hopefully when that is necessary, we'll be able to reach out to other people and organizations to help grow this community.
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for answering those. Okay, awesome. We can kind of move on to another question, kind of similar to that. Is what are some of the best ways that your school's administration has supported you and your student group? Because I know that universities can be helpful in some instances, so I think it's good to kind of talk about those and see just kind of what inspiration is out there for other universities who are wanting to support any up and coming rural student groups.
My answer will probably be pretty brief, but the Office of Minority Student Affairs was wonderful in working with us. But sometimes I do wonder, they're kind of the only university entity that we've been able to work with. And the only thing we've been able to do together is just send an email out to students. It's definitely a push. We're definitely trying to push them and advocate. So that's an ongoing effort. It's definitely ongoing for the administration side.
Yeah, I think similarly, at Princeton, the main avenue we've been able to work through is the Center for Access and Opportunity. I've spoken with admissions here and there, but I would love to see a more like broad approach to rural student things.
I would say my suggestion is to get a Corinne. Corinne is great for RSA. She's been here since the beginning. Like I already said, she helps us build out our mailing list. She's come to dinners that we've hosted and talked about her experience as a rural admissions officer, just to start building that dialogue. And our relationship with admissions has also been great to give RSA members things to do and feel like they're also giving back to the rural high schoolers that were like them and addressing their concerns and their questions. So that's what I would say for Yale's campus.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Thanks everyone for that. No, I can also definitely speak to Corinne. Corinne has guided me from when I was a first year navigating my rural identity to graduating and kind of working with RSA throughout those years. So admissions officers like Corinne are people who do the work to actually get it in. So thank you, Corinne. Kind of shifting from student organizations, and asks an interesting question about kind of rural students at universities, and we're coming back home with those. So how might you like take your degree back to your home communities to contribute to the vitality of small towns? So I guess just kind of how do you think you might in the future work towards like helping the communities that shaped who you were?
I can go first. I've been thinking a lot about this question lately as a senior, and determining what I want to do next. It's also going to be a session at the conference I'm planning, so hoping to think about it more then too. I guess just, playing off of what Liana said, I would love to be Princeton's Corinne at some point. That's sort of my career aspirations right now. But I think it's a really complicated question, right? Because, when I come home and tell my family some of the things that I've experienced at Princeton in terms of like comments that they've made about home, I think my community starts to get this perception like, who is this new Madison coming back after going to Princeton, even if I don't feel like a new person in any way. So I don't know that I have a fully well-rounded answer to that, but it's something that I'm hoping, rural student groups can start tackling together, how to navigate this balance of home and career, and hopefully have a positive impact on our home communities.
So this one is also, even just as a junior, is something that I actually kind of went through this phase where freshman year, I was like, screw it, screw my hometown, so bad, sorry. But, like I'm moving on. Like I'm never gonna go back there. Like, ooh, look at me. And then it wasn't until I got a bit of a college education and took some sociology classes that I started to realize that even though I'm rural, and this is something I've been looking to mention, and I pretty much always mention when talking about Rossi, is that my only barrier to education is being a rural student. I am not low income, I'm not first gen, and I'm not a racial minority. And I know that the more barriers you stack on someone, exponentially harder it gets. And so as I learned that, I really started to see my community with a different eye than what I had previously. But in that, it's really challenging because that was kind of a recent revelation, as far as like in the past year or two. So I don't have a good answer for that. That is something I do want to somehow. Yeah, see, you can tell, like I don't even think I've spoken about it out loud yet. That's a phenomenal question for sure.
I would say for me, sort of like Liz, I got here and I was so excited to see the world, experience new things, and I definitely still feel that. But the more and more time I spend here and the more time I relish going back home and driving in my car and being able to touch grass. I just want to go back into good work at home because I Northwestern Pennsylvania. We're on the edge of the Rust Belt. We're also, there's a fair amount of agriculture, and I think there are a lot of things that I'm learning here at Yale regarding social justice and development and climate change, at least for me as an environmental studies major, that I want to bring back to my home and help them begin to think about these things in a way that isn't, oh, we have to become like an urban city, but there are things to draw from and things to consider like a city does. And that there are unique rural problems that require solutions that are specific to those, just to overall revitalize those small town communities.
Oh, this just made me realize, so sorry, Clayton. Rural medicine, that is, I was thinking kind of the in-between, as in like what I'm gonna do in the next 5 years, but eventually my goal is to become a doctor, fingers crossed. Feel like everyone knows how hard that is, we'll see. But yes, rural medicine. I don't wanna get into it because if I do, then I won't stop talking because I could talk about it forever, so.
Yes, yeah. Thank you all so much for hearing about that. I definitely had a similar experience to Liz of kind of coming to Yale where I was like ready to just ditch my town and kind of move it and make it in the big city. And then when I went to Yale, I was like, oh, I can't believe that I just did that, and like kind of like neglecting a lot of the problems of like that exist in my town and not really thinking about it like critically. And so Yale helped me realize a lot of that, mostly at like the juxtaposition of seeing people from cities. I think that's kind of how I realized it, where I just like looked back on it. But okay, so another question that we have is from Elizabeth. Yes. So it says, how do you cope when professors' expectations are that you will function at the level or have the background knowledge of your peers who attended wealthy suburban public schools or private schools? So that could be about like internships, post-grad job opportunities, different things like that.
Ooh, I'll jump in on this one. Also, I think that was one of, if I'm not mistaken, one of our Rossi members who asked that. So hi, Elizabeth. It's great. But Elizabeth is actually a physics major, so I know she understands. Coming from a STEM perspective especially, it was insanely challenging. Dealing with classes and professors' expectations. First day of class, they were like, okay, first 5 chapters are review. You should have learned this like sophomore year. And I would have never seen it. I had never seen it. We had 2 AP classes, so I'm really lucky for that. But I mean, it's honestly hard to articulate because there are just so many gaps that I had in knowledge when I came here. And it really felt like I had to put in like 3 times the hours just to get to the same place that everyone else had been at. Yeah, that one's really tough.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything Liz said. I remember, I guess thinking about intersecting identities, like throughout high school, I was really interested in science, but as a woman, my teachers didn't really support me. And then when I came to Princeton, it was like, there's no way to enter science if you didn't try your absolute hardest and like learn a bunch in high school. So, it just kind of built on itself, and I ended up not going down that path. But on the flip side, I also think there are a lot of really exciting skills that rural students bring. And I try to do my best to elevate those in the classroom, whether it's, community building, interpersonal conversations, being really empathetic and noticing, things that your peers might be going through, or, even like hard skills in terms of like farming and hunting and things that we typically think of as rural skills. So while we may be behind in other things, I really try to elevate some of the other skills that rural students bring into academic spaces.
Yeah, I agree that rural students bring a certain skills and experiences that a lot of their counterparts don't, and that's 100% something to value. I will say here at Yale, I find the pressure to match my peers from suburban and private schools to come from myself. I don't necessarily think it comes from my professors. I don't know. I don't think they consider those things. So I feel like on my end, I'm the one who has to make up for that. The lucky thing is there are a lot of academic resources on Yale's campus. And so I remember my first year going through my first writing classes and having to write these research papers and realizing I have never done this before. I have no idea how to read, even let alone write. And so it was coming to terms with the fact that I need to go and use these resources to help myself reach the point where I need to be, at least for my own well-being.
Yeah, great. Thank you all so much for talking to that. Really appreciate hearing those perspectives. I definitely felt a lot of those experiences, especially being someone who navigated the internship process and now has a job out in the real world. So I totally get that. But yeah, that was our last question. So I think we'll go ahead and wrap up the discussion. But I think just this conversation, I just want to point out that this is super important, especially when forming rural student groups on universities' campuses. Just hearing from like everyone's experiences today of just the transition process of being from a small town and then going to a university and navigating so many different things of like the learning curve, like internships, everything. There's just so much that there can be taught to rural students who are adjusting. And so I think just having these rural student groups is incredibly important of finding other students from small towns who struggle the same way and kind of can give some expertise like early on rather than having to go through the hardship of it all. But yeah, thank you all so much for attending today. I think we're kind of good to wrap up. I don't know if Corinne had any closing words, but yeah, thank you all so much for coming.
That's all. I just want to thank our presenters for joining us and thank you all for being here. And if you want to see more of these presentations and learning labs, we're going to return in January with some more sessions. So thank you all and have a great evening, afternoon, wherever you're joining us from, and we'll see you all soon. Bye.
Great. Awesome. Thank you, everyone.